morning. My name is Janet Belkovich, and along with Connie Taylor, I'm the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Johnson County. How many of you have been to a meeting before? How many of you have not? The ayes have it. Thank you. You are all very welcome, whether you're a member or a guest. We're so happy to have you here. As you know, the League is a grassroots organization. We are nonpartisan. We neither support nor oppose any political party or candidate. For 71 years, the League of Women Voters of Johnson County has worked hard to engage and educate voters on vital issues through programs like today. We encourage you to use the information that you gain today to inform the way you advocate and vote. Gotta vote, right? The church would say amen, but you could clap. So today's topic is a personal issue for me, and that's because 2 years ago, my nephew was shot point blank in the head. Now, he's one of the people that didn't pass away, but the life that he lives now is severely impaired. You know, we read a lot about the victims of gun violence in terms of murders, but we don't think about what is life like for those who don't die and what is life like for their families. So I was so happy to meet grandparents for gun violence and find other people who would advocate along with me and with the League. So thank you for being here for that. A question I have is, what if each of us in this room can prevent one catastrophic event by talking with someone about gun safety? Think about that. If each one of us, there's 70 people here, we could avoid one catastrophic event. Life would be richer in the community. Sorry, I'm juggling. So today's topic is also one of great importance to the League of Women Voters of the U.S., which adopted a statement position on gun policy at the 1990 convention and amended it again in 1994 and 1998. In part, the League believes that the proliferation of handgun and semi-automatic assault weapons is a major health and safety threat to our citizens. We support gun safety education and other licensing procedures for gun ownership. After the presentation, we'll take questions from you. Please write questions on the paper found on your chair and lift it up to be collected. We'll wrap up today with a couple of League of announcements. Now, I'm delighted to introduce Jennifer Day, our brilliant Vice President, who will be moderating today's program. Let's give Jen a round of applause.
I don't know what makes that happen. There we go. I'm going to put this in my pocket and see if that helps. All right. Good morning. I just like to pull everybody together with that. Thank you all for coming today. As you can see, there's a lot going on around this area. There's going to be more as we're getting through this program, as many people take time to support gun safety efforts during this important Wear Orange weekend. I have my orange on as well. I notice a lot of you do too, because I join in the effort to call for meaningful action to save lives, as I hope for a future free from gun violence. We welcome Judy Sherry, founder and president of Grandparents for Gun Safety, and Mark McCormick, award-winning journalist and deputy director of strategic communications for the ACLU of Kansas, for our discussion today. Thank you both for joining us and for sharing your time and your expertise on this important topic. So why don't you just take a couple of moments to tell us why you are involved in this kind of activism. Judy, you want to start off?
Ladies first.
Yes, please.
I got involved after Sandy Hook, as many other people across the country did. I'll give you a quick thing. In October of 2012, I heard a speech by a Presbyterian minister who had been at the gun violence issue for 40 years. He was way ahead of his time. And I left that meeting all fired up, and I was going to get involved. And then I went home and did the laundry and made dinner and took the kids to school. and it kind of went away. Then Sandy Hook happened, and of course, like everybody, I was appalled. But I don't even know the word for how I felt in January when those families all went and got nothing from Congress. And then that's when I finally said, okay, as we are now saying all the time, enough is enough. And I won't take any more time except to say I read about a group in Cape Cod called Grandmothers Against Gun Violence. I called them and we got together. The rest is history.
Okay,
Yikes.
got it.
I thought I must have said something wrong already. So by September of 2013, we had a group that had started and we've been at it ever since. And as we say all the time, this would be a group we would love to see have to disappear, but we're in it for the long haul.
Grateful for you. Thank you so much for sharing that information. Mark, why do you do this? What's your involvement?
3 quick stories. I think I'm responsible for that feedback. Before I was 30, I'd been held at gunpoint 3 times. As a small child who clung to his dad, and wherever his dad went, we were at one of his friend's house, and someone was playing with a gun, and the gun went off, and the bullet hit the leg of the chair that I was sitting in, and I fell over. And I looked up to see all the men in that group grab the guy that was playing with the gun. And the relief on their faces when they picked me up and turned me around to see if I'd been shot, and I had not. Gun violence had touched my family in 2008. I had a cousin who had coached his team to the state championship and was on his way to a celebration, and his son, who was driving, was going to meet him there. And when he stopped at a stoplight, he looked over at the person in the next car, and that person pulled out a gun and shot him. And it reverberated not just in our family, but in the entire community because of the kind of kid Robert was. That this sort of wild instance of random gun violence could just reach out and grab anyone that you love and then take them. And the last story was leaving the Louisville Courier-Journal, where I was the religion writer, and moving to Wichita and experiencing 26 drive-bys in the first 2 weeks I was there. One of those cases that I wrote about had to do with a young man sitting on his porch with his 3-year-old when someone drove by and shot at him. I grew up around guns. My dad had lots of guns. I am not a gun person. I do not care for guns. It makes me uneasy when I'm at Walmart and you see someone open carrying. I was an adjunct at Wichita State where I taught journalism, and I got that job because the previous professor quit in protest because guns were allowed in the classroom. They didn't tell me that when they offered me.
I would.
Yeah.
But like Judy, the last story I'll tell, I was in a newsroom in 2012, and we were all stunned about Sandy Hook. But we were thinking, as terrible as this is, the fact that children died this time will make a difference. But it was actually a moment in this country where we decided that it was okay to kill kids. But instead of feeling despairing, which doesn't help anyone, we just had to tighten our belts and start moving forward in the way that we're trying to do today.
Right.
And I had told Jennifer that I appreciated the way that our discussion was being set up because it was hopeful. And so much of what we hear makes us feel afraid and powerless. But that's not who we are. And that's not what we're going to allow.
Well, and that's a good point. We will be talking about a lot of statistics and sharing some information that can be somewhat shocking to folks. throughout this presentation, but hopefully we end with that feeling of let's move forward with a new idea in mind or a new fervor, right? So let's just start with that. So can we take a moment to compare and contrast the differences in action by lawmakers when the impact involved a member of the White House staff, as in the case of Bill Brady being wounded during the assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan in 1981, versus the inaction since Columbine in 1999, Sandy Hook in 2012, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in 2018, and the list sadly goes on and on. So Mark, why do you think there was such a solid effort on the part of lawmakers to enact change in the mid to late 1980s compared to what we've seen over the past 2 decades? What's changed?
Oh, sometimes it does matter who gets shot. I mean, I just put it like that. I can remember where I was when President Reagan was shot. And I can remember hearing the stories about him entering the emergency room and still groggy asking the doctors there, I hope one of you is a Democrat. I mean, is a Republican.
The other was better.
Yeah. But I'm going back to the newsroom now. You know, we were writing about this incredible human toll as it pertained to gang shootings. And I had an editor say, how are you going to get people to care about inner city kids killing each other when our audience is not that? And that said to me that it does matter who gets shot. I felt like the stories I was writing about human beings. You should care that human beings are being killed. But the fact of the matter in our society has a lot to do with who gets killed. You know, after President Reagan was shot, we passed some pretty effective gun measures that kept this issue at bay for many years. When it was rolled back, that's when we began to experience what we are experiencing now.
Right.
More shootings than days.
That 20-year period, right? Which was,
Yeah.
I think, the assault weapon ban sunset. It was a sunsetting that happened with that. They'd put that into the law in 2005, 2004. Anyway.
I think
Oh, was it more recent than that?
Yeah, yeah. The only thing I would add to that is that what the big change was when Wayne LaPierre took over the NRA. The NRA was really a sportsman's club. It really was. And he came along in 1977 and he really changed the entire way they operated. He was the one who brought in the whole fear factor and the lobbying and all of that. So now we're looking at it today, the rise of the NRA, though they are losing members, that they are still funded by gun manufacturers. So they owned the legislatures. We're so polarized today that we can there is no middle ground anymore. And the final thing I would say is I think our elected officials have absolutely no courage, probably kind of short on empathy. And that's a problem. But that's, as we're going to keep talking about, whatever we say, my answer to that is it doesn't matter. You just keep on going. Right. We're going to wear them down. We say all the time, if you can't change a legislator's mind, change the legislator. Yeah. And that's what we're here for. That's a really good point.
That's, where the League of Women Voters comes in. We got to make sure everybody votes.
Absolutely.
Got to make sure everyone votes. So
we're right there with you.
Yeah, let's talk about the impact that guns have on public safety in the U.S. So talking about the statistics before, what are some statistics that people might not be aware of that could help bring perspective, like, that you have for your organization there?
Well, since she prepped us so well, I of course did homework and number one, I think the stat that shocks people all the time is the annual gun deaths. Last year it was almost 48,000, over 48,000. One third are homicides, 2/3 are suicide and accidental death. And all we talk about is homicide. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't. But of all the things that we can affect, homicide is probably one of the least. We honor the people who were shot, killed, or survived, but there are all these upstream things. We all know it. So our focus with grandparents is to say, what can we do? What can we affect? So we can affect the 2/3. We can talk about gun safety. We've never talked about we're against guns. In our heart of hearts, that may be the case, but the reality is in this country, there are more guns than people, and that's never going to change. So our message is be a responsible gun owner, period. So that I think that the 2/3, 1/3 is important. Of the 1/3 that are homicides, 1% is mass shooting. 1%. And that's what we talk about all the time. And I think that's what makes people feel so hopeless so often, because this is a one and done, a one-off. How do you find these poor young white men most of the time? How do you find them? We know we're being radicalized. We know all that, but we can't seem to find them in time. So that's the one. Remember that stat. I brought a fact sheet, and we will never test you. There's 76 facts on there or something like that. Pick up a couple that you know that resonate with you and try to remember them when you have a conversation. Okay, to date, as of June 2nd, this was yesterday, deaths from firearms are 17,870
In the year 2023.
in the year 2023 to date. Homicide is 7,772. Suicide is 10,098. So then you add the injured people, another 14,878. Of that, 269 were mass shootings. So the total response to gun violence, the total number of victims and survivors, and the year is just half over, is 32,748. That is appalling. I mean, that is so beyond unacceptable.
Yeah, it's
Just, we can't, people worry that we're getting numb to it. And then sometimes, I don't think we're numb, but I think all of us they can't remember which one. They'll say, oh, that shooting, I don't know, maybe in Nashville. We can't even say the names anymore.
That's Mark and I, before the program started and we're having a little discussion. I was trying to remember one that happened several years ago that was featured on in the Kansas City Star. And my response was to the editor. They were plastering a photo on the front page of the gunman aiming a gun at the camera, whatever it was that was happening. And I think we've kind of gotten away from that at this stage of things. But Mark, what's your take on the impact that guns have on public safety? And do you have any statistics that are different from Judy's, or do you have some comments about those statistics?
I really don't. I think, to be honest, we know how bad it is.
Yeah.
We have to do, as Judy suggests, is start a march toward responsible gun ownership.
Yeah.
We have a sense for how bad things are and how difficult it is to remember the last shooting. And I mean, I remember the early ones starkly. I can remember being in the newsroom for Sandy Hook, as I said, and Columbine. But what we have to do is start forcing our legislators to listen to us. And if they won't listen, change the legislator.
Well, and I think that's a good way to lead into the next question that I had created for this. But so when we're discussing gun ownership in the U.S., we're often focused on the rights embodied in the Constitution, right? The Second Amendment. But what about the responsibilities that should be associated with those rights? Can we discuss the rights of those who choose not to own firearms, which might be the case for many of us in this room? What are those rights? And are they mentioned in the Constitution as well? I think that's something I've heard, the 14th Amendment maybe, and I'm not sure if maybe Mark, you have anything to say before that?
I have my ACLU list of, I'm ready to talk about that one. We'll give it to Mark first, but I'm ready to read this one.
Well, I'll let you go first. I'll say that because this is an issue where the ACLU tends to disappoint. We tend not to talk about gun rights. To have a right that would supersede someone else's right to have a gun would be so overwhelming. That's not something that we would support as an organization. We have talked in the past about gun ownership being a group right as opposed to an individual right. But because we tend not to focus on this particular issue, civil libertarians count by saying 1, 3, 4, 5. We skip the Second Amendment.
Well, even Scalia, who wrote the supporting opinion in what's called the Heller decision, where this gave the individual the right, even he said rights have responsibilities, number one, and he also called out 3 areas that people who fell into one of those wasn't able to get a gun. One was a convicted felon, one was a domestic abuser, and the third one was somebody with severe mental health issues. And that's what we should be able to catch with background checks. But here's another stat for you. There are background checks have to be done by a federally licensed gun dealer. The guns are sold now person to person. They're sold on the internet. Now you can build them. So to think that there is not universal background checks, 60% of the guns sold in America, a person is subject to a background check. Although in some states, they have a 3-day, they give you 3 days to do it. And if you can't figure it out, then the gun can be sold. And that happened, again, I can't remember, I think it was with Ruth, whatever the first gun. With his name, he was in, we can relate to this. They were looking in, say, Johnson County, but he really lived in Jackson County. And in 72 hours, they could not do the background check, so he got the gun. So 60% have a background check, 40% don't. That means when we get on an airplane and we're with 100 people, 60 of them we know we feel pretty good about. 40 of them, we have no idea who's getting on the plane. And that is just so unacceptable. And I will just say, and then I'll be quiet, the laws that we want passed are so basic. In the olden days, we used to call it common sense. Now, like everybody else, we have to be politically correct. And so it's common ground, because common sense insinuates that the person has none, which in my opinion is correct. That common ground does at least say that we respect the rights of gun owners and non-gun owners. So as I say, it's a more politically correct, but I will tell you, the kids, they don't like that we went to safety. They say, this is violence. Don't sugarcoat it. And don't say common ground, because it's really because you guys can't think straight. So anyway, the 14th Amendment was, this thing sheet was made for people under 80, but I've got it. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges of immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process or law. We have a right to life, liberty, and safety.
Yes.
You'll reprint these.
I can appreciate that. And I think that's what we had discussed going into this this program, the idea of how these rights and responsibilities impact the psyche of the public at large, right? So when there's so many people, from children to adults, perhaps dealing with a certain level of fear on a day-to-day basis when performing standard tasks, right? Like going to school or work, or to the grocery store, to church, synagogue, to a temple, or a music concert. How can they best navigate the emotions that might be involved in that sort of thing, right? This is talking about mental health solutions, or joining gun safety advocacy organizations, et cetera. What do you think about that, Mark?
About how we do what in particular?
So navigate the fear that's involved with, that's associated with doing these day-to-day tasks, right? These, and how we're talking about these laws that we don't want to abridge infringe on our rights to safety and security and life.
I think some of this has to do with the factoids that Judy was just sharing, and understanding what we can do about those things. But I also think that in our current society and how we operate, narratives seem so much more powerful now than facts. In fact, if there is a fact put between you and what you want to believe, you will abandon the facts for the narrative. And the narratives are really what we've been fighting as it pertains to these issues. People want to come and take your guns. Well, no, we want you to be responsible with your guns. We don't want you to leave it around unlocked. there's a narrative that we have to overcome, and understanding that there's a narrative being projected, and that by and large, we may not be getting a true sense for the dimensions of the problem, as some of the statistics that Judy has shared earlier indicate that the problem in some areas are much worse. I mean, you wouldn't automatically assume, for example, that the suicide rate was so much higher than the homicide rate. But I can tell you that as journalists, we tend not to cover suicides at all.
Right.
At all. So we won't have a clear sense of the dimensions of the problem, but it begins with understanding the problem and then understanding that there is a narrative being produced that we're also bumping up against.
Right.
I will also say that everything you said is correct. I think we just have to get beyond the fear. And I know that's easy to say, but we're here, your group, our group, because we're going to fight it. We see it now more than ever. People are really engaged. They're enraged. They want to advocate. They're beginning to understand. And so I think you have to have a certain amount of fear. But, every president has always said, we're not going to let terrorism win. Well, this is terrorism, and we're not going to let that win either. We just have to do what your group does and our group does, is get out there. And I think we all feel better. It's kind of, I'm going to use an example that is so foreign to me because I hate yard work. But when you're thinking about, oh my God, there's all those weeds out there. I don't know what to do with it. I can't do it. And if I pull them today, they'll be back tomorrow. Then you go out and you do it and you feel better about it. And it's kind of the same thing. I mean, yes, we're fearful. Yes, you don't know what nut is next to you and what he or she is ready to do. I said he or she, but I really mean he. But if you do something, some small anything, you're making a difference. And what I always say to people, fortunately, the legislators don't seem to be able to count. So they don't realize the base is 35%. There are more of us than them. So that's the job. That's the job.
I would add to that simply that, if you don't move, sometimes you don't notice your chains.
Oh, good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. And it was, yeah. Can you say that again, Mark?
Those of us who do not move do not recognize that we're in chains.
Yeah. So poignant. The next question I had kind of rolls into this about how we adjust to those emotions that run at such a high level so much of the time. And in that sense, are we having our empathy whittled away? Again, something we had been discussing as we adjusted to this the idea of this program and making sure that we covered all these points. Empathy is such a huge part of this. You've mentioned it with the legislators. I think that's how we all think about it. But every day, the humanization of our fellow man seems to be falling by the wayside. So does the media play a part in this? If so, how? Do we each play a part in that aspect as well? What's your take on that, Mark?
I think we have a violent culture, and that we've been a violent culture for a long time, and that we even view the resolution of issues through violence. We measure our greatness as a nation based on our military might. But I'll give you a good example of how this is impacting us. So back in 1999, Wichita had 2 quadruple homicides within 10 days. The first one involved teenagers and a domestic violence issue where the boyfriend was coming to shoot not just his girlfriend, but everyone who was in that house. The first person on the scene was a 12-year-old boy who went back and got his mom, brought her back to the scene, and she was aghast. And while she was gathering herself, she noticed her son tiptoeing through these bodies to unhook the video game. He was unfazed by the sight of the 4 bodies. And so she pulled him out, and the child even testified in court about, what he had seen. And I was sharing this story long after with David Satcher, who was the Surgeon General. He was speaking in Wichita. And he said, please send me that story. At the CDC, we want to establish gun violence as a public health concern.
Mm,
So
very important.
So the story that Dr. Satcher was interested in had to do with us pinpointing the child's address, drawing a circle, a mile circle around it, and studying the data in that area. And it became clear that this child had probably seen many dead bodies. He'd seen stabbings, he'd seen drive-bys, to the point where he could walk into a scene and be unmoved, but have police officers show up later and stumble outside and vomit at what they had seen. This child was completely unfazed.
It's almost impossible to fathom.
It is, it really is. And I think with that, video games don't help us. I mean, they live in these neighborhoods, sadly, where they see it, but video games and movies, the movies I go to never even make the top 10 list, and Felicia finds them for me. Basically, it's all about violence. But what I will say is on the one hand, I do blame the media, because the media talks 100% about homicide and mass shootings. If they get a chance with mass shootings, it can go on for days. So they don't, but they're getting a little better. If you notice, they always name the victims. They do not name the perpetrator. We at our meetings, every meeting, we read the names of people who have lost their lives to homicide in the month between. It's usually 14 or 15. We need to get used to, these are not numbers. These are humans. These are somebody's child or mother or sister, whatever. And so the statistics, they're important, but I worked for Walt Bodine many, many years ago, and he taught me something that was, some of you must have heard. I mean, I know I'm the oldest person in the room, but somebody has heard of Walt Bodine. And he always had us say, like, he never said, don't say the handicapped, say handicapped people. And I think gun survivors, we need to talk about the statistics as people. We have lost 34,000 plus people. Somebody loves them, and we have lost them. And that's what we have to do.
So one of my favorite writers is Leonard Pitts. And so Leonard used to say that if you were to tell me that 6 million people were killed behind this insane pogrom, it's so horrible. My mind, I can't wrap my mind around that. But if you tell me about a little girl who was in hiding, right? You tell me about all the things that she went through in hiding, and then you ask me to multiply that, then it's a lot easier for me to understand. You know, I had mentioned my cousin losing his son. You know, when he met Robert, Robert was only a year old when he started dating his mom. And he was trying to get the child to come to him, and he lured the child to him with a potato chip. And so the baby came and sat in his lap and was just really comfortable. And so when they left, he held Robert out in front of him, and he said that the baby smiled and grabbed his face and kissed his nose. This is who he was going to see in the emergency room. This is the person for whom they were walked into a room called the quiet room, which is ironic because that's where all the screaming begins when people are told that their child's gone. We have to find ways, as you say, to personalize this violence and close the emotional distance between people just being shot over there versus when it happens in our lives, because we have a tendency when there's distance to rationalize it. When it moves close to us, suddenly it's an epidemic.
Right. And you saw what happened with Ralph Yarl. Somehow that whole story caught on, and that's because it was started to be personalized. I mean, it was such an astonishing story, but that is what we need to do. And I think we remember during COVID, they talked about the people, and they always talked about who they were. They don't do that in a mass shooting. They'll read the names. So I'm grateful for anything they do to personalize it. And, you know, it is the most important thing that we can't forget. That's why this is not some mystical issue. These are people dying.
Yeah, focusing on again, that humanity, the rebuild of empathy. It can be exhausting. Empathy can be exhausting. I think we all can admit that, right? But I think kind of moving into the discussion from that perspective, how do we respond to the suggestion that guns aren't as big of an issue as mental health care access, maybe when it comes to gun safety solutions? We hear that perspective a lot in this discussion at this point in time. And I know I have a specific answer for it, but I'd love to hear.
You go
Well,
first.
Mental health issues happen across the world. And yet here we are in the United States dealing with it's being handled by guns as the solution to a lot of the problems. Whereas you have countries like the UK and France and others where they don't have the same access to weapons, and yet they still have the same mental health issues. So your take on that, Judy?
It's a red herring. It's that simple. They don't want to say the G word ever. You'll listen to every legislator. Either it's not the right time to talk about it, or they want guns don't, then the NRA is guns don't kill people, people kill people. And most legislators immediately devolve to mental health, although when the mental health bills come up before them, they seldom pass them. That's another issue. But again, I think 1/4 of mass shootings are committed by a person who is obviously a mentally unhealthy person. They've known it. He's whatever. I mean, they know that. So the rest of these shootings are very often the result of young men, because that's the primary predator, and they have been radicalized by what they see on the internet. We read about it all the time. These kids fall into this rabbit hole of liberty and all about me, and you can't tell me what to do. Whatever it isn't mental health. Mental health is an issue. It's a piece of it, but you can't just fall back on that. Particularly, you can't fall back on it when you won't fund it. They need to be called out on that.
Yeah, the funding is important. And I think that just speaking to that really quickly, those gentlemen, those boys have access to weapons.
Absolutely.
And they haven't shown signs that. So this can lead into the question of how do we keep them from maybe having the guns locked up would help in the house, right? Just having them secured better by their parents or their, the guardians involved. And so we can talk about that a little bit later. What do you think about that?
Oh, Judy made my point.
Yeah.
It's frustrating to have people talking about, well, it's a healthcare issue, when all the levers of power are making sure that people can have insurance. So
yeah, that seems like a simple answer there. But speaking of that, though, the United States is the only country in the world that has more civilian-held guns than civilians. I think we talked about that earlier, but why do we have so many guns in America? I know this is a bigger question than probably we need to be.
We're going to fix it here.
I like optimism.
We were founded by guns. We were founded, people came over and they shot people. That it was the war. I mean, we are a gun culture. There is no question. So we wish that there weren't more guns than people. We almost have to just kind of deal with that and talk about how you mitigate it. And how you do that is, it's all about access. It is so simple. We really need to go back to common sense legislation, because it's all about common sense.
it's common ground.
No, it isn't. I'm mad today. Today, in this room, it is common sense. When I talk of the big world, I'll do what I'm told.
Man,
But it's just bizarre that the guns are so readily accessible. And now that you can build them yourself, and the gun people don't even want your gun to be registered, that it would be a very basic thing and be a huge help in crime fighting. If they could tell, sometimes you can tell from the bullet where I don't understand any of this, but I know it's true, that they can identify a gun and sometimes trace where it is. But the NRA, everything to them is the slippery slope. I don't know, none of them must ski because they don't like the slippery slope. And the fact that we all register our cars, we get licenses, we do all those things. We're not allowed to do any of that. in the gun. In fact, there is a law that I cannot say its whole name, so I'll use its nickname, called PLACA. Gun manufacturers cannot be sued. Cannot be sued if their gun is used to kill somebody. And I'll tell you very briefly, because last year, our forum, we do an annual forum, and I will tell you about that. But our keynote speaker was a gentleman named Josh Koskoff, who won a $73 million suit on behalf of 9 Sandy Hook families. And they'll never see the money because Remington is bankrupt, but that wasn't the point anyway. What he went after very creatively was their marketing, because you couldn't get them on anything else, but their marketing went from, again, pre-Wayne LaPierre, with these hugely boring ads about a picture of a gun and then 7,000 little statistics, but none of them had to do with you can mow down, 100 people. It's all very nits and grits. It was very sportsman stuff. And then he just traced how the advertising has gone to manliness, fear, and you can do it and you need to have a gun. And these kids, again, got radicalized. And I mean, it's really, I won't say it's that simple, but that's where it's coming from.
Well, and I with the number of guns that we have in America, and we'll probably move into this on the talk about the access to it. Do you think that that's the bigger problem, is the access, or do you think it's the security of them in the home? Mark, what do you think?
It's how they're handled, whether they're locked up. And I can't tell you how many times we've had to cover stories where a child found a gun. It's also important, again, to point out just how violent the culture is and how we have such a casual attitude about it. I mean, these are symptoms of a culture that is ill as it pertains to these kinds of issues, as it pertains to violence, as it deals with not just the gun issue itself, but who we are as people. I'll give you an example. My friends had a boss who had unearthed a mask in his backyard in South Carolina. And he had it on his mantle, and he had no idea what this mask was, but he wanted my friends, because they were African American, to see it. He thought it was from that era. And I had to explain to him that in South Carolina, where they grew sugarcane, they used to make slaves wear the mask. And in that heat, those masks became like little ovens.
Yeah.
And it just pulled the flesh off the face.
Wow.
And he had this on his mantle.
Yeah.
And he was shocked when I had to explain to him, but I don't think we really have a sense for who we really are when it comes to these kinds of issues. And that's what has made progress on these issues so difficult, because we're busy dealing with symptoms, but we're not dealing with the core problem.
Right. No, that's a really good point. So speaking of the security of guns, you have a Lock It for Love program that can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'd be delighted, and we have a whole thing in the back. Yeah, again, as we realized that homicide was not going to be our main issue, that safety was, we have a program called Lock It for Love. It's been, I think, about 6 or 7 years since we've had it, and we give out free, high-quality gun locks. You'll see back there. The NRA has a program called Project Safety or something like that. And they give away gun locks too. And that's what mental health people have in hospitals and police, but they're very flimsy, and they will the keys will tend to break after 2 or 3 uses. So again, we decided we wanted to give away good gun locks. And so when we began the program, we worked very closely with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, and they helped direct us to events. We wanted to go to community events. We don't give them away one at a time. We give them away at events. And we've done, Barb could tell us, she's some boys, I don't know how many events, 300, I don't know how many, but we have given away from over 5,200 gun locks.
Oh, wonderful.
And we know we've saved a life. There is no question. Some toddler picked up a gun and couldn't use it, And that's what we hope. We know with suicide that sometimes the ideation is 10 minutes from when something happens and you think, I can't take it anymore. And if you can't find a gun, it can pass. I mean, if you can't access it.
Right.
So the Lock It for Love program is, our goal is to educate. We give away, besides the lock, we give information away. 4.6 million children live in a home with an unlocked loaded gun. And people just don't get it. They don't realize it. They did a program, some of us must have seen it many years ago, where the kids were, the Eddie Eagle program, which basically is an NRA program that was just passed, I believe, by your Kansas legislature.
Vetoed.
Oh, yes, good. And they haven't had time to override. Good, that's a great thing. Where they put all the responsibility on the kids. And certainly you want to teach kids, if you see a gun, go get an adult, don't touch it. All of that is good. But how many of us have told our kids, don't run in the street, and they know that they can sing, that, look both ways out, and then their basketball that they're shooting in the front yard goes in the street, and they're done. So doing this and educating people how dangerous it is and how important it is to keep a gun locked.
Yeah, there's
a
a retention problem for kids, right? I think that was part of one of the arguments about it in the legislature, but we had talked about this a little bit before the program, Mark, that we have to tell people several times, and kids are even worse, right? When it comes to that.
Sure.
I know I have to hear something several times. I can only imagine how my 10-year-old brain is working hard to face that. This reminds me, I've been watching a TV show recently on Netflix, and there's a CIA agent who thought someone was breaking into her home. She was asleep, dead asleep, thought someone was breaking into her home. And the first thing she does is dive out of bed, head to her safe, where she dials a code, opens the safe, puts the gun together, puts the bullets in the gun. So even it's being depicted in television shows, which I love, that even a CIA agent is keeping their gun in a safe and locked manner with the bullets separate from the weapon itself. So
I would like to tell that woman that you are 22 times more likely to be killed with your own gun in your own home than you are saving yourself. So the chances of your home being broken into versus your 3-year-old finding your gun sitting on the coffee table, they don't work in the favor of.
it was her boyfriend coming home in the television show. So
People get shot. I mean, how many people, we haven't even talked about it, we don't have time.
yeah.
The families of victims and survivors, as Janet pointed out. What would you feel? I mean, does Ralph Yarrow feel any, I'm sorry, does Mr. whatever his name is, does he feel any remorse over what he did? What if you killed your partner coming home? And that can happen. We say to people, first of all, lock up your gun. I would say to people, keep your cell phone by your bed if you need to. Stay in your room. Don't go anywhere and call 911. I mean, don't shoot. The idea of shoot first and think later, it's tragic consequences.
Well, it sounds like Mark has had that in his life,
Yes.
right? With that experience of,
It's frightening. My grandfather was a famous Oklahoma lawman. The bank robber, Pretty Boy Floyd's gang, not Floyd himself, but the gang went to my parents' hometown to rob the bank. And I have one of the pistols that the gang member had when he was trying to rob the bank, because my grandfather was the chief of police. I have it because it's an heirloom.
Sure.
But I don't want guns in the house. I didn't want guns around, period. And it's just, so much a part of the culture though.
Yeah.
Everyone has a gun and there are guns everywhere.
right.
Can I say one thing? Sure. I'll probably say more than that. But we always say we understand why people have guns. We have to say that, but I do believe that. Some people have a family heirloom. Some people have wonderful memories of going out hunting with grandpa or the whole family. Some people like to target shoot. There are all kinds of reasons. We can't just blanketly say if you own a gun, there's something the matter with you. But no matter what you are, who you are, from crazy to really nice, just lock it up. It's that simple.
Really good point. I'm not sure if we had any questions that were coming in from the audience. I've got a couple more here just to talk about, considering that, the heaviness, we're talking about some pretty heavy topics here. So as we attend events like this and see what's going on out in the world, how can we best work against that possible helplessness that we have mentioned that we may feel even in our advocacy efforts, right? How do you keep going? Let's start with Mark first. How do you keep going, Mark?
We covered this a little bit earlier about the importance of activity and movement. I also think that something else we talked about a lot today was empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we'd all feel more comfortable standing up for someone else as opposed to just ourselves. And it's that spirit that I would like to encourage today. One of the best books I've read maybe in the last 10 years was by Brian Stevenson. And he was talking about, the book is called Just Mercy. And he is a lawyer who specializes in getting people off death row and getting children out of adult prisons. So every time he would appear in court, there was a lady in the back row who had become familiar to him, but he'd never spoken to her. He would just see her sitting in the back constantly. So finally, he made his way back there to talk to her. And she explained that years ago, she'd lost her grandson to gun violence. And she sat in court hoping that the kid who killed her grandson would be convicted and sent away. And when it happened, it didn't help her grief. So she made it a point to come to court every day and comfort people the way someone had comforted her. And she called herself a stone catcher. She said, there has to be people willing to stand in front of people who are being hurt and catch the stones that are being thrown at them in order to make progress on these issues. And what we need in our society are people more concerned with their responsibilities than their rights. They have to be more concerned about others than they are about themselves. And I think we're all called in a certain way to be stone catchers, not just on this issue, but on many issues. But we have to begin caring more about other people, not what party they belong to, not what color they are, not how they present, but just because they're human beings.
Right. Somebody loves them. That's what I think about. I just want to remind us that Mark is so eloquent. But what I want to say is you can see on our sign back there, our 3 words are educate, advocate, participate. We thought we made it up and I've since seen it again. But basically, it is so important. That is what keeps us going. You educate, we talk to people like you who probably don't need as much education as many do. But once you have facts in hand, you can have a conversation. And we always, and I know you all talk about it, it's a conversation, not a debate. Your point is not to win. Conversation is not I win, you lose. It's did you know? And just give somebody a fact or here's how I feel. But educating people is so important. Advocating, we all know is important. And to me, I think advocating to these legislators is fun. It's kind of like a game. I used to call Blunt's office every Monday morning and just complain about something he had done, just because it made me feel good. I mean, so it's a game. You keep writing these people. We send postcards to them all the time. They probably pitch them, but they got to look at them on the way to the trash. You have to advocate. You have to be out there. And then the participate is just the final piece of that. You have to do it. We stood outside last night in the heat and held up signs. Most people honked. We got a couple of the wrong digits, but most people were very supportive. And that's what we have to do. There are more of us than them. That's the thing we have to remember. People are basically good. We know that. We read about bad people and then you read about GoFundMe. Or when you ask people, something happens, there's a fire, and you ask people to collect some, and things come in all over. We are basically good. And so talking to people, I'm moving legislators aside, talking to other people and assuming that they have empathy and you can help them understand. That's what we do. And it's fun. That's all I can say.
Not everybody is as informed as, say, you or any.
Well, they will
people in
be
this
after
room.
they get that fact sheet.
Right. They will be after they get the fact sheet, but we shouldn't assume, right, that our neighbors and friends and family all have the same information. And having these conversations with them is a big part
Huge.
of making that educate part, right? Got a couple of questions from the audience that I think some of them are law-based, and I'm not sure if you know the answers to these questions. I think what might be a good opportunity to advocate and participate is to write to these your representatives. So like this one here, can cities in Johnson County pass gun safety laws, such as requiring guns to be locked up? If these laws are more restrictive than Kansas state laws. And I don't think they can. They can pass ordinances. Like, for example, I think in Prairie Village, if you're looking at your phone, you can be pulled over. It's an ordinance that the city has. I don't know that we have the same one in Overland Park, for example. But there might be restrictions. That's a really good question to talk to your city council person about, and or the legislature.
Well, there's basically in Missouri, and I didn't know there was in Kansas, it's an exemption where the state legislature has said no community can pass any law that would countermand the law in the state. So that's, we give out warning signs at gun dealers where we just say, guns can kill, and we deal with suicide. We give the suicide hotline. We asked the Kansas City, Missouri city council to pass an ordinance. They couldn't. They gave us a resolution and we put it on the sign because we figure nobody knows the difference between a resolution and an ordinance, but they couldn't pass it. And we could, Mayor Lucas wanted to make us a sanctuary city, I believe, for immigrants. Can't do it. So you just do it. Basically, you just go ahead. Okay, we won't. And then you do it.
I love it. But again, reaching out to your representatives to ask those questions. They love to hear from folks about those sorts of things. And for the folks who don't like to hear from you, they need to. They need to hear from more of us on those sorts of things. So,
Judy, you have me wondering what you were like as a teenager.
we could do a whole program on that, I bet. So, Mark, as a journalist, we had talked about this a little bit before the program as well. I think
I'm a recovering journalist.
Sorry, recovering
Don't
journalist.
ever recover.
As an award-winning former journalist,
Right.
what do you think about the idea of showing the impact of gun violence, particularly assault weapons, on the human body? We had talked about that, the idea of showing a picture, perhaps.
I would not be in favor of that. When we were talking earlier, was talking about how exposure to that kind of content, and I'm talking, from personal experience, what it does is it begins to shave away our sense of empathy. When I started at the Louisville Courier-Journal about 2 months before I got there, bless you, about 2 months before I got there, a man wandered into the press building, which was next to the newspaper, with a semi-automatic weapon, and he started shooting the pressmen. The photographers who were on the 7th floor heard the shots, grabbed their cameras, and ran into the press room. They were a few steps behind each victim who had been shot. The newspaper eventually ran a photograph of one of the pressmen shot through the chest, laying on a big roll of newsprint. And the justification for that photograph was that this was so horrible, so out of the ordinary, and that you had the photograph from the photographer. They felt obligated to run the photograph. My thought, had I been the editor, would have been about the pressman's family.
Right.
And that there are other ways to depict this than rather than going in that route. I think we understand the dimensions of it. We also have to understand what this is doing to us, given the long-term exposure to it. And I think I never want to lose this sense of revulsion that I would see when I saw something like that. And I think the constant exposure of it, I think, is irresponsible. I also think that the way, and I'm going into, I'm getting up on a media soapbox now, but most broadcast news organizations are so understaffed that they can only send a photographer to a shooting or to a car accident. So that, we used to say about broadcast news in the newspaper business that if it bleeds, it leads. And what What it does, to Judy's point, is it gives you a distorted picture of what life is like in your community.
Mhm.
And I think those kinds of photographs do that to us. They do impact us. And I think there are other ways to depict what we want to depict or what we need to depict
Right.
than going to the graphic.
Maybe sending those pictures to the legislators would be.
Well, that's not a bad
Right,
thing,
maybe.
but I
I'm
think,
not sure that would move, frankly.
Yeah, unfortunately. So,
I think most of us
We
can.
would have to send them money.
oh, sadly.
I was just gonna say, I think most of us can understand, because I agree with your idea of the families, the people. But when we know that a child has to be identified with her tennis shoes, we don't have to see that picture to really hear what they're saying.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I don't.
So we're talking about that, can you repeat the statistic about the number of homicides
Oh.
versus?
Yeah, two-thirds of the gun deaths in this country are suicide and preventable accidental deaths. 1/3 is homicide, and of the homicide, 1% are mass shootings. And that is what we see on TV all the time.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't, I want to respect everyone's time here. We've got a little bit more. And I could keep going until noon.
Yes.
But yeah, so I think we've covered a lot of these points. There's this last question that came in is discussing the impact of the Dickey Amendment on gun violence today. I'm not familiar with the Dickey Amendment. So does that sound familiar to you?
I can't remember. I used to know when I was younger. I forget. I mean, it had something, it was either, well, who's the person who asked the question?
Yeah, that's the question.
Remind me what the Dickey Amendment is. Okay, right,
Okay, so
Thank you.
the limitation on the CDC budget to do
Right.
research.
right. Right,
That's a,
right.
thank you.
And they got there was one of the laws was passed. Thank you for reminding me. They gave funding to the CDC, but the law is one thing, then you have to fund it. And somehow they just never got around to that. So they're still not funded to do the research.
Well, I think that that's a lot of information that we've covered. Hopefully it's helped folks. My last question was what kind of tangible effort can be made to enact change to save more lives? I think we're doing it. I think we're in the moment right now. And at the same time, contributing to a stronger sense of safety in the general public when it comes to firearm ownership. Again, it's this kind of effort. It's what we're doing today, coming together on a lovely Saturday morning. Maybe a little bit warm. We might want to go to the pool later to cool down after all this, have some relaxation time. So I thank you both so much for being here and spending this time.
For both of them.
And I'm going to go ahead and invite Connie up. Connie, come on up here. And I think you get this microphone now. So let's see if we can pass this off without the
And she's
interruption.
closed.
Keep it down there.
Okay. Well, this has been quite an informative program on gun safety and public health. Thank you again, Judy and Mark, for your knowledge in presenting today. We have learned the proliferation of guns in our culture and its impact on public health is quite sobering. Here's what else I learned today. Mark's quote, "Those who do not move don't recognize that we're in chains." And I loved Judy's mission of grandparents for gun safety is very similar to ours. Educate, advocate, participate. We need to care more about others than ourselves. And we need to recognize that there are personal impacts to gun safety and gun violence. There are personal impacts to gun violence. Janet with her nephew, I was impacted by an acquaintance within the past week who committed suicide. So it does impact us all in one way or another. Be a responsible gun owner. There are fact sheets available, but we have to do something. We have to feel better about what we're doing and to just do it. We have to move forward. Move forward. So each one of us can do something to affect change in our local community, to affect change in our local environment, our own personal safety, and those who we love. For me, I won't be mentioning it. I'm going to go get the Locket for Love. I'm also going to have conversations with my friends, my family, and my neighbors about the impact, the personal impact of gun violence. So what will all of you do as a result of this program? What will you do to advocate and participate? So just a couple other things that I want to bring to your attention. The League of Women Voters of Johnson County doesn't falter in its commitment to our position statements or our mission. We are to empower voters and to defend democracy. Yet every now and then, it's important to take a break to focus on other things. And for the summer, that's exactly what we'll be doing. We'll be taking a short scheduling break in July and August with our monthly programs. Let me tell you about 5 things that we will be focusing on. You have seen these flyers throughout the room. It's about our summer celebration. It's on Thursday, June 15th at Tomahawk Hills Golf Course, the Elm Ridge Room. So check out our details on our website at www.lwbjoco.org for more information, or scan this little QR code and it'll take you right there. Our fabulous voter information team, Marie, Debbie, will be scheduling our candidate forums in advance of the local election primary on August 1st. So keep an eye out for the voter newsletter and updates on our website for more details as they become available. And we know leaguers just love refreshments at our monthly meetings, our coffee and our treats. So Janet and I have a plan and we hope to unveil it by September. And we have a plan. We also hope to finalize our plans for our regular location for our monthly meeting. It's in the works. We hope to have some information soon, so stay tuned. And our wonderful nominating committee will begin its yearly work on looking for our own candidates to fill vital leadership roles for our league. So if you're interested in serving on the nominating committee or being considered for a board position, please reach out to Janet or myself. Once again, thank you, Judy and Mark. Thank you, Jen, for moderating and organizing this wonderful event. And participate, advocate, educate.
And vote.
And vote. And vote. And vote. Vote. Do more than vote. Thank you all for sharing Saturday morning with us, and we hope to see you soon.